The night my son-in-law stood up at our Thanksgiving table, raised his glass, and toasted to my daughter by saying she had finally learned to stay in her lane, and his mother laughed so hard she had to set down her wine. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask him to leave my house, though it was my house and I had cooked every dish on that table and the turkey had been brining since Tuesday. I smiled, picked up my fork, and said, "How lovely." Then I excused myself to check on the sweet potato pie. In the kitchen, I stood at the counter for exactly 90 seconds. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, the way my cardiologist taught me after my first stress test at 61. Then I took out my phone and sent one text message to a number I had been keeping in my contacts for 3 months, waiting for exactly this kind of moment. But I am getting ahead of myself, and a story like this does not begin at the table. It begins the way most damage begins, quietly, with something that looked like love. My name is Irene Calhoun Marsh. I am 67 years old. I live in a craftsman bungalow in Decatur, Georgia, 12 minutes from the Emory University campus, where I spent 28 years teaching family law. I have written 3 textbooks. I have testified as an expert witness in 41 cases across 7 states. I have sat across from men who believed their charm made them invisible, and I have watched juries see straight through them every single time. I say this not to impress you. I say it because it is important that you understand I am not a naive woman. I am not a woman who misses things. And yet I missed it. For 14 months, I missed it almost entirely. My daughter was 33 when she married my son-in-law. She had been a pediatric occupational therapist for 8 years, the kind who remembered every child's name, who kept drawings on her office wall, who cried in the parking lot after hard days and went back in anyway the next morning. Her name is Daisy, though everyone calls her Ada, and she got that stubbornness from her father, God rest him, and that laugh, wide and uncontained, filling whatever room it entered. She came by that honestly from no one but herself. Her father, my husband Franklin, had a heart attack on a Tuesday morning 3 years before the wedding. He was making coffee. He was 63 years old and had just retired. He had plans. We both had plans. The grief was the kind that does not arrive all at once, but in ambushes. In the grocery store, in the particular way afternoon light fell through the kitchen window, and the empty side of the bed that somehow felt wider every year instead of narrower. Ada was devastated. She and her father had a bond that I always envied slightly and appreciated enormously. He was the one she called when she was scared, the one she called when she needed steadying. When he was gone, she became a woman looking for solid ground. My son-in-law appeared 18 months after the funeral. He was 40 years old, a commercial real estate developer who had made considerable money during the Atlanta building boom of the late 2010s. His name was Clifton Beaumont Hargrove III, which he mentioned in the first 2 minutes of meeting me, as if the numeral were a credential. He was tall, well-dressed, attentive in that particular way that looks like devotion but is actually surveillance. He asked Ada about her patients without prompting. He sent flowers to her office on random Tuesdays. He called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up, and in a season when Ada was learning to exist in a world where the most reliable person she had known was no longer in it, Clifton offered consistency. I told myself I was being a protective mother. I told myself my discomfort was grief talking, that I was comparing every man to Franklin and finding them lacking. I told myself this for 14 months. The first year of their marriage was beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful from a specific angle. They bought a home in Buckhead, a brick colonial with a wraparound porch that Ada filled with ferns and rocking chairs. Clifton grilled on Sunday afternoons. He poured good bourbon and told funny stories about contractors and city permits. When I visited, he took my coat before I had finished taking it off. He was attentive in that slightly excessive way that I had spent 28 years teaching law students to recognize, but I kept overriding my own instincts with grace. Then his mother arrived. Eloise Hargrove relocated from Birmingham to Atlanta 7 months after the wedding, moving into a condominium complex 6 minutes from their house. She was 68, widowed, immaculate in her appearance, and absolutely certain that she understood how a wife should function. She had raised Clifton. She had watched him succeed. She had opinions about the interior of a marriage, the way some people have opinions about the interior of a house they do not own. She inserted herself with such gentleness that Ada did not recognize it as insertion at all. She offered to help with dinner and then quietly restructured how dinner was made. She commented on Ada's wardrobe in a way that seemed like admiration and landed like instruction. She told Ada once, over sweet tea on that wraparound porch, that Clifton had always needed a wife who made his home feel like a sanctuary, not an extension of a workday. Ada laughed. She told me about it later like it was a funny thing, an old-fashioned woman had said. I did not laugh, but I did not say anything yet because I had only one data point. I needed more. The changes came slowly enough that I might have missed them completely if I had not been trained to look for exactly this kind of pattern. Ada stopped talking about her patients with the same enthusiasm. She used to call me on her lunch break, spilling stories about milestones and breakthroughs, and the particular joy of watching a 5-year-old who had struggled for a year finally tie his own shoes. The calls shortened. Then they became texts. Then the texts became shorter too. She stopped wearing her natural hair out. She had worn it in a full twist out for years, and it was magnificent. The kind of hair that made strangers stop her in parking lots to ask about her routine. One Sunday, she arrived at my house in a sleek press style I had never seen on her, and when I told her she looked beautiful, which she did, she said Clifton preferred it this way, that it looked more polished, more appropriate for the events they attended together. I filed that in the back of my mind and kept watching. She resigned from the clinic. That was the detail that stopped me cold. Ada had worked at that clinic since her second year out of graduate school. She knew those families. She knew those children. She had told me once that she could not imagine doing anything else with her professional life. And one afternoon in October, 16 months into the marriage, she called me to tell me she had resigned. Clifton felt it was time for her to step back. His business required a lot of travel, a lot of entertaining, and he needed her to be available in ways a demanding clinic schedule did not allow. He needs me, she said, and her voice had that particular quality of a person reciting something they are still working to believe. I asked if this was what she wanted. There was a pause I will never forget. It's fine, Mama. It's just a season. Ada had never in her life described anything as a season. I started keeping notes, not a formal log, nothing that would alert anyone if found, but a small leather journal I kept in my purse, the kind I had used to track details during consultations. Dates, times, exact words. Changes I observed. The resignation. The hair. The phone calls that shortened. The way she glanced at Clifton before finishing a sentence at dinner. The way Eloise would touch Ada's arm whenever Ada expressed an opinion that diverged from Clifton's, a small steadying touch that looked like affection and functioned like correction. The Thanksgiving table was where it became undeniable. I had hosted Thanksgiving in my home since before Ada was born. It was my table, my tradition, my turkey, my mother's sweet potato pie recipe, made with fresh grated nutmeg, because my mother did not believe in the jarred kind. Clifton and Ada arrived with his mother, which was expected. What I had not expected was that Eloise had also brought her own cranberry relish, set it on my table without asking, and positioned it next to the dish I had already made, as if they were in competition. I let that go. I had bigger concerns. Dinner was fine until dessert, when the conversation turned to Ada's former clinic. One of my neighbors who had joined us mentioned that she had heard the clinic was expanding to a second location and asked Ada if she was involved. Ada opened her mouth. Clifton got there first. He said she had moved on from that chapter, that Ada had bigger things ahead of her now, that some women thrived professionally but discovered that their real gift was creating an environment where the people they loved could thrive, and that Ada had that gift in abundance. He said it the way certain people say compliments, as a door closing, And then he raised his glass and said he wanted to toast to his wife, who had finally learned to stay in her lane. Eloise laughed. She laughed as if her son had said something charming. She said, "That is exactly right. That is what a real partnership looks like." Ada smiled at her plate. My neighbor looked at me. I looked at Ada. In 91 years of Thanksgiving dinners in my family, no one at my table had ever been toasted for their silence. I excused myself to check on the sweet potato pie, and in my kitchen I sent a text to a woman named Gwen, who had been my colleague for 11 years before she retired to run a domestic violence resource network in the metro Atlanta area. The text said, "I think it is time we talked." Gwen called me back in 4 minutes. I stood at my kitchen counter while the sound of Clifton's laughter drifted in from the dining room, and I told her everything. Not just the toast, all of it. The resignation, the hair, the shortened calls, the glances, Eloise's hand on Ada's arm. Gwen was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I wrote down in my journal that evening. "You are not describing a difficult marriage. You are describing a managed woman. There is a difference, and the difference matters." She told me to keep documenting. She told me not to confront him yet. She told me that the most important thing I could do in this moment was maintain access to my daughter, which meant not becoming a threat that they would find reason to exclude. I went back to the dining room. I complimented Eloise's cranberry relish. I told Clifton the bourbon he had brought was exceptional. I helped clear the dishes and laughed at the right moments and drove home at 9 o'clock with a jaw that ached from holding a smile in place for 4 hours. For the next 3 months, I watched and recorded and showed up. I showed up for coffee on Saturday mornings when Clifton was at his office. I showed up to help Ada with a garden she was trying to plant in the backyard, something she had told me she wanted to do but had not yet found the time for. I brought seeds. I brought gloves. I asked about the neighbors and the house and her days, and I listened to everything she said and everything she did not say. She had no debit card. I did not discover this dramatically. I discovered it the third Saturday morning in a row that Ada paid for our coffee with cash, exact change, from an envelope in her purse. I asked once gently if she had lost her card. She said she just liked cash. The fourth Saturday, I asked again. She looked at the table. She said Clifton managed their finances, that he was better at it, that she had never been good with money anyway. Ada had managed a clinic budget of $400,000 annually for 6 years. She was meticulous. She was precise. She had never in her life been bad with money. The cash in the envelope was $180 for a week. For a woman whose occupational therapy license and 8 years of experience could command $90,000 a year or more, $180 in an envelope was not financial management. It was a leash with the dollar amount attached. I wrote it down. I kept going. Elias had a particular habit of calling Ada every morning between 9 and 9:30. I know because Ada always stepped away from whatever we were doing to take the call, and always came back slightly different, a little more careful in what she said, a little less present in her laughter. I asked once what they talked about. Ada said, "Oh, you know, just checking in." She said it the way you say something when the true answer is not one you are ready to say out loud. The detail that broke my composure, the only time in those 3 months that I came close to losing it, was a Wednesday afternoon in January. I stopped by unannounced because I was in the neighborhood and had brought Meyer lemons from the farmer's market. Ada answered the door in a long-sleeved blouse on a day that was 57 degrees, warm for January in Georgia, but not cold enough for what she was wearing. She made tea. We sat at the kitchen table. At some point, she reached across the table for a lemon, and the sleeve rode up. I saw the marks on the inside of her forearm, finger-shaped, yellowed with age, which meant they were not new, which meant this was not the first time. Ada pulled the sleeve down before I could speak. She said she had bumped the edge of the counter. She said she bruised easily. She picked up her mug and changed the subject to the garden. I held the mug that Ada handed me, and I kept my face completely still because I had spent 28 years in classrooms and courtrooms learning how to receive devastating information without allowing it to change my expression. Inside, I was making a decision. Not the decision of a mother, the decision of a woman who had spent her career studying exactly how power is used to destroy people and who was not going to let it destroy her daughter. That night I called Gwen again. She connected me with a woman named Beverly, I will not use her last name, who worked as a forensic financial investigator specializing in domestic economic abuse cases. She also connected me with a therapist who specialized in coercive control and an attorney in Midtown who had successfully litigated 8 cases against defendants with substantially more resources than Clifton Hargrove. And then, the piece that changed everything came from where I least expected it. It was a Sunday morning in February, and my phone rang from a number I did not recognize with the 205 area code. Birmingham. I almost did not answer. When I did, the voice on the other end was a young woman, speaking carefully, as if she had rehearsed each sentence to make sure none of them were wasted. She said her name was Imani. She said she had been married to Clifton Hargrove for 2 years, 4 years before he met my daughter. She said she had been trying to find me for 7 months. She said she found me because of a faculty profile from Emory that still appeared in search results, and that she hoped I would not hang up. I did not hang up. Imani spoke for 53 minutes. She told me that she had been an emergency room nurse when she met Clifton, that Eloise had arrived within the first year, that the process of reduction she described was identical to what I had been watching happen to Ada. The career, the wardrobe, the money. The social calendar managed and narrowed until there was almost nothing left of the woman who had walked into the marriage. She told me that the marks had always been in places fabric covered, that when she finally left, Clifton and Eloise had called her workplace and told her supervisor she was emotionally unstable and a danger to patients. She had kept her job only because a charge nurse who had known her for 6 years vouched for her character. She had filed a police report. The case had been declined for prosecution due to insufficient evidence. Eloise had sent her a card afterward, a sympathy card. Handwritten inside it was one sentence: "You were not what he needed." Imani had kept the card. She had kept a police report, the medical photographs from the ER where a colleague had documented her injuries off the clock as a personal favor, the text from Ellie was coaching Clifton on how to describe the marriage to a counselor they saw briefly before Imani left. She had kept everything in a fireproof lockbox in her mother's attic in Vestavia Hills, Alabama, waiting for a moment when it would matter. She told me she had suspected there would be another woman after her. She said she was sorry she had not found me sooner. Her voice broke once, just once, and then steadied. I told her she had found me exactly when she needed to. I told her that what she had kept was not a collection of pain. It was a body of evidence. I did not tell Ada about Imani with a folder of documents. I did not arrive at her door with a presentation. I arrived on a Saturday morning with Meyer lemon scones that I had made from a recipe my mother gave me, and I sat with Ada at her kitchen table while Clifton was at a site visit, and I held her hands across the table, and I told her there was a woman named Imani who had something to tell her. I watched my daughter's face as I spoke. I had braced for resistance. I had been told by Gwen and by the therapist that she might deny it, might defend him, might ask me to leave. What I saw instead was something I was not prepared for. I saw recognition, the slow, quiet recognition of a woman who has known the name of what is happening to her and has been waiting, without realizing she was waiting for someone to say it out loud first. She was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor was mowing their lawn. Then Ada said, "She knows about the inside of the arm." It was not a question. I said yes. My daughter, who had her father's stubbornness and her own laugh and 8 years of professional expertise helping children find their strength, looked at me across the kitchen table with eyes that I had watched since the day they first opened and said, "I want to go home." Mama. She meant my house. She had not called it home in 2 years. We moved carefully because Gwen and Beverly and the attorney had made clear to me that carefully was the only way to do this safely. Clifton was in Charlotte for a site visit on a Thursday. Elias was at a luncheon in the space of 4 hours with the help of Ada's former coworker from the clinic who showed up with her pickup truck and my neighbor who came without being asked and did not ask any questions. Ada's personal belongings, her professional licenses, her identification documents, her grandmother's jewelry, and the ferns from the porch were relocated to my home in Decatur. By the time Clifton's flight landed, Ada's attorney had filed. The petition included Beverly's financial analysis of the allowance system, which had traced over $60,000 of Ada's savings redirected into accounts she had no access to over 22 months. It included my journal. It included the testimony of Imani, given voluntarily, with every piece of documentation she had preserved in that lockbox. It included a statement from the therapist who had assessed Ada over 6 weeks and documented the symptoms consistent with coercive control. Clifton's response was predictable because men like him only have one playbook. First came the messages, hundreds of them, flooded across every platform, soaked in the language of transformation, of regret, of love that had apparently been present the entire time but had expressed itself in ways he was now prepared to acknowledge were not ideal. Ada read none of them. Her attorney read them all, documented every one, and noted in the record that contact had continued after the no-contact agreement was established. Then came Eloise. She called Ada's former supervisor at the clinic Ada had left 18 months ago, to say that she was concerned about Ada's mental state and felt the professional community should be aware. She called 2 of Ada's friends with variations of the same message. She sent a handwritten letter to me, 3 pages on cream stationery, explaining that I had damaged my daughter's marriage out of jealousy and an inability to accept that Ada no longer needed me in the same way. I framed that letter. I did not hang it up. I put it in a file. Every call Elias made was documented. Several were recorded with the knowledge of the parties who received them. Clifton's attempt to access Ada's professional licensing information through a contact at the Georgia State Board was flagged and became part of the record. The fake email sent to Ada's new employer, she had quietly resumed her license and accepted a consulting position, was traced. The hearing was 4 days. Clifton arrived each morning in a charcoal suit with his attorney, who was impressive and expensive and had no counter for the weight of documented patterns stretched across 2 marriages and 7 years. Imani testified on the second day. She did not perform a motion. She simply described in the clear and methodical way of a woman who had worked in emergency medicine for a decade exactly what had happened, when it had happened, and how she knew. She placed Eloise at the center of both situations in a way that removed any possibility that Eloise's involvement had been coincidental or maternal. Ada testified on the 3rd day. She described the toast. She described the envelope of cash. She described standing at her kitchen counter ironing a shirt because Eloise had told her that a man of Clifton's standing noticed the collar, and that noticing the collar was how certain men showed they were paying attention. She described the inside of her arm. She described Eloise teaching her which concealer to use and how to blend it so that no mark was visible in anything sleeveless, saying that presentation was everything and that a wife who looked cared for reflected well on everyone. The courtroom was very quiet when Ada said that, the kind of quiet that is weight. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses who had the expression of someone keeping a great deal very carefully behind her face, was not moved by Clifton's attorney's argument that both women had interpreted a demanding man as something more sinister than he was. The pattern was the argument. 2 women, 2 marriages, 1 system, 1 architect. Clifton was convicted on charges of domestic battery and financial abuse under Georgia's family violence statute. The financial fraud findings resulted in a separate civil judgment. Eloise received a permanent protective order and was named in the civil case. The $60,000 in redirected assets was ordered returned with interest. When the verdict was read, I was sitting behind Ada. I watched the back of her shoulders. I had watched those shoulders since she was 3 days old, since before she could hold up her own head. When the judge finished speaking, Ada's shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in the way that a person breathes out after holding their breath for longer than the body was designed to hold it. She turned and looked at me. She did not cry. She just looked at me the way she used to look at her father when he had done something that fixed what was broken. That was 3 years ago. Ada works 4 days a week now at a pediatric rehabilitation center in Brookhaven. She took a 6-week sabbatical last spring and drove across the country with a college friend she had not seen in 4 years, the one Eloise had called a bad influence, posting photographs from national parks and roadside diners with a frequency and joy that made my phone buzz at all hours and made me laugh every single time. She bought a condo in Kirkwood with the returned assets plus her own savings, a third-floor unit with east-facing windows that she says are the first thing she sees every morning. She wears her hair however she wants. She wore a crown of twists to her best friend's wedding in September that was so beautiful, a photographer asked if he could use the photos in his portfolio. She said yes without looking at anyone first. She is not seeing anyone right now, and when I asked her about it, she said she was learning to enjoy her own company again, that she had forgotten how much she liked herself, and that she thought it was worth taking time to remember before she invited anyone else in. I told her that was the wisest thing I had ever heard anyone say. Imani and Ada have had dinner twice. They do not talk about Clifton or Eloise. They talk about their work and about Imani's small herb garden in Vestavia Hills, and about the particular freedom of living in a space where no one tells you which way the light should fall. I wrote this down because I spent too many months telling myself that what I was seeing could be explained another way. I wrote it down because I know there are mothers reading this right now who have noticed the silence where there used to be noise, the long sleeves in warm weather, the way a daughter laughs differently in certain company. I know because I was one of them. It is your place. It has always been your place. There is no version of loving someone in which you are required to watch them disappear and call it respect for their choices. Trust the discomfort. Trust the pattern. And when the moment comes, not if, but when, make sure you have been paying close enough attention to be ready. Before I go, let me leave you with what this season taught me. The most dangerous thing about this kind of harm is how reasonable it looks from the outside. A man who provides well, a mother-in-law who offers help, a wife who seems content. None of it looks like what it is until you know what to look for, and most people never learn to look. Pay attention to the small changes, not the dramatic ones. Dramatic changes are easy to explain away. Small changes accumulated over time tell the true story. The person who normalizes the harm is not a bystander. Eloise was not a passive witness. She was the system. She built it, maintained it, and replicated it. When you look at the people surrounding someone who is hurting, look at who is making the hurting feel ordinary. Access is everything. The first thing this kind of control does is shrink the circle. If someone is being gradually removed from the people who knew them before, that removal is not coincidence, and it is not the natural drift of adult relationships. It is architecture. Stay in the circle. Show up for coffee. Bring seeds for the garden. Do not give them a reason to close the door. Document what you witness. Not to build a case, though it may become one, but because clarity is a resource. Memory softens and shifts. Written words stay. And last, you cannot rescue someone before they are ready to leave. But you can make sure that when they are ready, you are already there, already prepared, already holding the door. That is the whole job. Not to force the moment, to be ready for it. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And leave me a comment below. I want to know what city you are listening from and what part of this stayed with you. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to find theirs.